Teen vanished riding her bike in 2003. 6 years later, her helmet resurfaces in the Oddest place. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of the Breyer family's kitchen, casting soft patterns on the linoleum floor as Katie zipped up her backpack and shouted a quick goodbye over her shoulder. Diane barely had time to turn around from the sink before the screen door slammed shut behind her daughter. The sound of bike tires crunching over gravel faded fast, swallowed by the soft roar of cicadas and the distant hum of a lawn mower from a few streets over. Katie was heading to the lake, the same way she always did when July rolled around and school felt like a distant memory. Her sky-blue Schwinn disappeared down the dusty road, her ponytail swaying like a ribbon caught in the wind, and that was it, the last living glimpse anyone would have of Katie Breyer. By early afternoon, the stillness had settled in differently, heavier, unnatural. Diane didn't notice at first. She'd been folding laundry and listening to the old kitchen radio crackle with news no one in Willow Creek cared about. But when she looked at the clock and saw that it was already 12:47 p.m., something inside her shifted. Katie always came home by noon, like clockwork. Diane called out her name from the front porch, half expecting to hear the soft ding of the bike bell or see that familiar blue blur racing up the driveway. But the road stretched on, quiet and empty, the heat warping the air just enough to make the world look unsteady. Diane's throat tightened. Something was wrong, and she could feel it in the way the birds had stopped singing. She tried to dismiss it at first, told herself Katie must have run into a friend, maybe Lila, or stopped at the corner store for an ice pop like she sometimes did on hotter days. But the ache in Diane's chest grew louder than reason. She dialed Lila's house, her fingers fumbling the numbers, heart thudding with a rhythm that no longer felt normal. Lila's mom answered, cheerful at first, until Diane asked the question. No, she hadn't seen Katie. Not today. Not all week, actually. Diane thanked her quickly and hung up, staring at the receiver in her hand like it might offer some other answer. Something colder than fear crept into her gut. She picked up her keys without thinking and got into the car, driving toward Tanner's Lake, gravel skimming the sides of her tires as dust rose behind her like smoke. The drive to the lake was short, but stretched out like a lifetime. Trees lined either side of the road like silent witnesses, their branches drooping under the weight of summer heat. Diane's eyes scanned everything, the ditches, the shoulder, even the trees beyond the guardrails, desperate for any flicker of blue or the gleam of bike reflectors. But there was nothing. The lake itself was still and empty, the surface smooth as glass, disturbed only by the occasional ripple of something unseen beneath. No towels, no bikes, no laughter, just silence. She got out slowly, feet crunching the gravel, and walked the edge of the water, calling Katie's name. Her voice echoed faintly, like the forest was holding its breath. There was no answer, not even an echo. Diane stood there for minutes that felt like hours, her gaze fixed on the water as if Katie might suddenly rise from its depths, grinning and dripping wet, arms stretched out for a towel. But the lake gave her nothing, no clues, no signs, no comfort. Eventually, she climbed back into the car, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. She didn't drive home. She drove slowly down Old Highway 9, retracing what could have been Katie's route, scanning every inch of the roadside like a detective in a crime she refused to believe was real. A patch of broken wildflowers, a squashed soda can, a torn corner of a candy wrapper. All ordinary things, now suspicious. Diane slowed near every bend, every turnout, whispering her daughter's name like a prayer. But there was no blue Schwinn, no helmet, no Katie. By the time Diane returned home, her skin was clammy and her mouth dry, as if the heat had baked the fear into her bones. She dialed 911 with fingers that wouldn't stay still, her voice cracking as she gave the dispatcher Katie's name, age, height, the color of her bike, what she was wearing, the time she left, and the road she always took. Saying it out loud made it worse, made it real. Within the hour, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived, their patrol car pulling into the driveway with a kind of quiet urgency that made Diane's heart drop. They were polite, measured, reassuring in the way people, are when they don't yet understand what they're dealing with. They asked questions. Had Katie ever run away before? Was she upset that morning? Did Diane and her husband fight with her last night? Diane's answers were quick, automatic, firm. No, no, no. Katie was happy. Katie was careful. Katie didn't just disappear. The search began that evening, just as the sky blushed orange and the air began to cool. Flashlights flickered through the trees lining Old Highway 9, and neighbors gathered in small clusters, murmuring guesses and passing out bottled water. The sheriff's department brought in a tracking dog, but the scent trail ended abruptly half a mile from the lake, right where the pavement faded into dirt. It was as if Katie had simply ceased to exist mid-ride. Her father, Tom Breyer, arrived home from his shift at the mill just as dusk fell, and when he saw the police cars, the clusters of people, and the panic in Diane's eyes, he didn't need to be told. He grabbed a flashlight and joined the search, yelling his daughter's name into the dark like it was a spell that could bring her back. But the woods stayed quiet. No footprints, no tire tracks, no helmet, no bike, nothing but the haunting hum of insects and the rising chorus of people realizing they had no idea what had happened. By the second day, the news had spread beyond Willow Creek. Local reporters began circling like slow-moving hawks, setting up outside the Breyer home with sympathetic voices and emotionless eyes. They asked Diane what she'd say to Katie if she could talk to her right now. Diane didn't answer. She just stared at the camera with hollow eyes until they turned it off. Volunteers from neighboring towns joined the search. They combed the woods in tight grids, swept the lake with sonar, and checked every culvert, cabin, and crawl space within a 20-mile radius. But still, no sign of Katie. It was like she had fallen off the face of the earth. By the fourth day, theories began to form, not from evidence, but from absence. Some whispered she had run away. Others blamed strangers or trucks passing through. The ones who knew Katie best, her teachers, her friends, her family, knew better. She didn't run. She didn't wander. Someone had taken her. The only question was why, and how they had left no trace. The days bled into weeks, and Willow Creek began to settle into the quiet discomfort of not knowing. Yellow ribbons tied around stop signs began to fade under the relentless sun. Missing posters fluttered like ghosts on telephone poles, corners curling, eyes of the girl in the photo forever locked in that hopeful, frozen stare. Diane stopped sleeping. Tom started drinking. Their house, once loud with laughter and the soundtrack of a teenager's world. Music leaking from headphones, slammed doors, hurried footsteps, became eerily silent. The smell of Katie's shampoo lingered in the bathroom for a while, then vanished like everything else. Her bedroom remained untouched, a museum of the last normal morning. Books stacked on her nightstand. A hoodie still crumpled at the foot of her bed. Her bike helmet, the one with the cracked strap she always promised to replace, wasn't there. It had gone missing along with her. The town moved on slowly, painfully, as small towns always do. New stories replaced old ones. A city council scandal. A brush fire near the state park. A teenager who crashed his car and walked away with nothing but a broken wrist and a second chance. But for the Breyers, time fractured. Everything split into before Katie vanished and after. Holidays came and went like shadows passing through glass. On the 6th anniversary, Diane sat at the kitchen table, lighting a candle in front of Katie's framed photo. It had become her ritual, the only thing that felt tethered to reality anymore. She watched the flame flicker, remembering how Katie used to roll her eyes at every sentimental gesture. She whispered her daughter's name, just once, and that's when her phone rang. Unknown number, hesitant breath, and a voice on the other end saying, "Ma'am, I think you need to come down to the station. We found something. It's about your daughter." Diane didn't speak. She simply stood, her chair scraping the floor behind her, and reached for her car keys with trembling fingers. Her mind tried to protect her, told her not to hope, not again, not after 6 long years of learning how to survive without answers. But something in the officer's voice had sounded different. Not final, not sympathetic. Uncertain, unsettled, When she arrived at the Willow Creek Sheriff's Office, the sky was bruised with clouds, and the air felt electric, like a storm just out of sight. Deputy Miles met her at the door. He looked older than she remembered, hair grayer, shoulders stooped. He didn't ask how she'd been. He just nodded and said, "Come with me." He led her down the hallway to an evidence room she'd never entered before. Inside, on a plain metal table, was a sealed plastic bag. And inside that bag, barely visible through the scratched plastic and years of grime, was a bike helmet. Pale blue, cracked strap, faded sticker of a cartoon sun peeling off the side. Katie's. For a moment, Diane couldn't move. Her eyes locked on the helmet like it might vanish if she blinked. She didn't breathe. She didn't speak. She just stood there, staring, while her body caught up to the unbearable recognition flooding her chest. She remembered the morning they bought it. Katie had rolled her eyes at the idea of wearing a helmet at all. But Diane insisted, threatened not to buy the bike unless she wore it every time. Katie finally picked that one because of the cartoon sun sticker. "It's stupid, but kind of funny," she had said, and Diane remembered laughing, relieved to win just one of the many small battles they fought daily. But now it sat sealed behind plastic, dulled with dust and time, like a relic dug up from a different life. Her voice came out dry, brittle. "Where did you find it?" she asked, even though a deeper part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. Deputy Miles cleared his throat, like the answer had been choking him too. "That's the strange part," he said. "It turned up last night, in a donation bin, at the Goodwill Center on Route 15. Diane's head tilted slightly, as if trying to decode the words. "A donation bin?" she echoed. "Like someone just dropped it off." Miles nodded. "We checked the cameras. Someone left a box of stuff, old shoes, books, a lamp, and this helmet was right on top. No face, no plates. Just headlights in the footage and a hand placing the box. Whoever it was, they knew what they were doing." Diane stepped closer, her hands trembling as she rested her fingertips against the cool plastic. "There's no mistake," she whispered. "No chance it's just similar?" Miles hesitated, then slowly turned over a second bag. This one containing a small, sun-bleached label with handwriting barely legible. It had been tucked under the helmet strap. "Property of K. Breyer," it read in Katie's unmistakable scrawl. Diane felt the room tilt. The air thickened. Her knees almost gave out, because the helmet hadn't just reappeared, it had come back. And whoever brought it knew exactly who it belonged to. They let her sit with the helmet for a while, though they wouldn't let her touch it, not yet. It was evidence now. That word hit her like a slap. Evidence. After all these years, all the silent birthdays and sleepless nights, all the dead-end leads and unreturned calls, her daughter was no longer just a memory or a name carved into a church vigil wall. She was a case again, a live one. "Do you think it's a message?" Diane finally asked, her voice rough like she hadn't used it in days. Miles shifted uncomfortably. "It feels like it," he admitted. "People don't hold on to something like this for 6 years and then just toss it. This was deliberate." Diane blinked slowly, mind racing in every direction at once. She thought of all the theories, all the times she'd replayed that morning in her mind, wondering if she'd missed something, a glance, a goodbye that felt off, a sound that hadn't belonged. But she always came back to the same void. Katie had vanished, cleanly, without a trace. And now, someone had reached through that silence and dropped a breadcrumb at her feet. A cruel one. Or maybe, if she let herself believe it, maybe a clue. "Have you reopened the case?" she asked. Miles nodded. "As of this morning, yes. The FBI's been looped in. If this is tied to interstate movement or trafficking, we'll need their resources." Diane's stomach turned at the word, but she didn't flinch. Not anymore. She was long past being afraid of the worst. She had lived in the worst. But now, something else stirred beneath the grief. Not hope, not yet. But motion. And motion was enough. "I want to see the footage," she said. "The security video." Miles hesitated. "It's not easy to watch. There's nothing clear. It's like the person knew where the camera's blind spot was. But you can see just enough." Diane didn't blink. I need to see it. And so they led her to the back room, where the monitor flickered to life. Grainy black and white footage filled the screen. The timestamp read 3:16 a.m. The donation center bathed in the kind of darkness that only existed in places people had long since forgotten. Then, headlights, distant at first, then brighter. A vehicle, maybe a truck or van, rolled up to the edge of the frame. No license plate visible. The driver never stepped into full view, but a hand appeared, long fingers gloved, placing a cardboard box gently into the bin. Not tossed, placed, like it mattered. Then, the brake lights faded into black, and the screen returned to stillness. Diane stared, her eyes burning. "They wanted me to find it," she murmured. "They're telling me she's still out there." And for the first time in 6 years, her fear twisted into something else, determination. The next few days passed like a fever dream, slow, surreal, and punctuated with moments that didn't feel quite real. The town took notice fast. Rumors bloomed overnight, like mold in the dark corners of Willow Creek. They found her bike, someone whispered in the grocery store aisle, only to be corrected. No, just her helmet. Does that mean she's alive? Does that mean she's not? The Briar's front porch became a revolving door of casseroles, candle-holding neighbors, and people too scared to ask what they really wanted to know. Diane spent most of her time at the sheriff's office, combing through old case files with renewed obsession. She pored over every lead that had once gone cold, every name that had been scratched out of suspect lists. She made a list of people who had left town in the months after Katie's disappearance, even ones that moved for normal reasons. Nothing about this had ever been normal. She found herself staring at the footage again and again, freeze-framing the still of that gloved hand, analyzing the cautious placement of the box like it could somehow reveal what kind of person would carry this much silence for 6 years and then break it like this. The FBI agent assigned to the case, a quiet woman named Agent Romero, arrived 2 days after the helmet was found. She wasn't loud or overconfident. Instead, she listened more than she spoke, and Diane, worn down by years of not being heard, trusted her for that reason alone. Romero sat across from her at the Briar kitchen table and spread out aerial maps, pinpoints, archived timelines. "We believe whoever dropped that box isn't someone random," she said plainly. "They knew Katie, or they knew someone who did." Diane glanced at the helmet, now sealed away again in a larger evidence bag on the counter. "Then why bring it back now?" she asked. "After all this time?" Romero didn't blink. "Because something's changed. Either guilt caught up with them, or something else is about to happen. This wasn't closure. This was an opening shot." Diane felt that same tight hum building in her ribs, the one she'd felt the day Katie disappeared, the one that never fully left. She pressed her fingers to her temple and closed her eyes. "I need to go back," she said quietly. Romero raised an eyebrow. "To where?" "The lake. The road. All of it. I know it sounds crazy, but I've walked it 100 times in my mind. Now I want to walk it in real life. With new eyes." Romero didn't argue. She just nodded slowly and said, "I'll come with you, because sometimes the only way to move forward is to go back, to the moment the world broke open, and retrace the cracks by hand." They drove out early the next morning, before the sun had burned the mist off the road. Diane sat in the passenger seat of Agent Romero's dark gray SUV, staring out the window at the town she'd lived in her whole life, but no longer recognized. It wasn't the houses or the street signs that had changed. It was the weight in the air, the invisible tension that seemed to pulse just beneath the surface, like something had woken up. When they reached the curve on Old Highway 9, Diane asked Romero to pull over. She stepped out of the car slowly, her shoes crunching against gravel, the cicadas beginning to buzz around them like a warning chorus. "This is where I think she turned off," Diane murmured, pointing toward the tree line where a faint dirt path split from the road. The kids used to call it the back trail. It loops around toward Tanner's Lake, but avoids the main access. Katie didn't like being seen by the lifeguards. She liked the quiet side. Romero followed her gaze, scanning the trees. "Is this path still used?" Diane shook her head. Not in years. After she disappeared, they stopped maintaining it. People said it was cursed. They moved slowly into the woods, the trail overgrown but still traceable beneath the weeds and broken branches. The air grew cooler under the canopy, and the sound of the road faded behind them until it felt like they were in another time altogether. Diane's footsteps faltered as they reached a clearing, a small hollow in the trees where the dirt darkened and the grass refused to grow. She remembered standing here 6 years ago, yelling Katie's name until her throat was raw. "They searched here?" Romero asked, crouching to examine a rusted soda can half buried in the soil. "Yes," Diane whispered, "but they didn't find anything. Not a shoe print, not a thread." Romero scanned the area. Sometimes people don't leave things behind. Sometimes they take everything with them. Diane stared at the trees, imagining her daughter riding into this silence, ponytail bouncing, heart open and unafraid. Something had been waiting here. Or someone. "There's one more place I want to see," she said. "It's about a mile from here. I don't know why, but lately I keep thinking about it." Romero gave a small nod. "Let's go." And so they pushed deeper into the woods, toward the bend where the shadows thickened, where something unseen had broken time 6 years ago, and where a mother's instinct now tugged like a string tied to a hidden door. The deeper they walked, the more the forest felt like a memory rather than a place, familiar in shape, but colored with something darker, like a song you know but can't quite place. The trees were tall and brittle, limbs arching overhead like they were trying to shut the sky out. Romero walked slightly ahead, her eyes scanning the trail with practiced calculation, but Diane was following something else entirely, not tracks or logic, but feeling. A pull in her gut, subtle and steady, like a whisper drawing her forward. After another few minutes, the trees broke into a clearing that neither woman had expected. The space was perfectly circular, overgrown with tall grass and thistles, and in the center sat the remnants of an old wooden bench, nearly swallowed by vines. Diane stared at it, stunned. "I forgot this was here," she breathed. Katie used to call it the fairy circle. She and her friend Emily used to stop here on their way to the lake, make daisy chains, pretend they were invisible. Romero approached the bench, brushing aside some tangled weeds. "This doesn't look like it's been touched in years," she said, crouching. "But there's something strange." She pulled back a patch of vines, revealing a small clearing of packed dirt directly behind the bench, a depression perfectly square. Diane stepped forward, frowning. "Is that a hole?" Romero didn't answer right away. She slipped on gloves and began to clear the space, her fingers gently brushing aside the top layer of soil. And then, a hollow clink. Metal. Romero dug more carefully now, until a flat, rusted object came into view. A box. Diane's breath hitched. "What is that?" Romero looked up at her. "Let's find out." She pried it open with a small utility tool, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside was a stack of old receipts, some Polaroids, warped by age but still legible, and at the bottom a small, folded map with a single red X marked just off the main trail, near the far side of Tanner's Lake. But it was the top photo that made Diane recoil. It was a picture of Katie, taken from a distance. She was riding her bike. The photo was time-stamped, July 11th, 2003, 8:42 a.m., the exact day she vanished, the exact outfit she wore. Romero stood slowly. Whoever took this was watching her. The box trembled slightly in her hands. "And I think they wanted us to find this too." A wave of nausea surged through Diane. Not only had someone followed her daughter, documented her, they'd returned to this spot, maintained it, hidden a clue. This hadn't been chance. It was a game, and someone had just made their next move. The drive back to town was silent, both women haunted by the image now seared into their minds. Katie, frozen in time, her face turned just enough that it almost looked like she was aware of the camera. Diane clutched the photo in her lap, unwilling to let it out of her hands, even as Romero drove with the box sealed tightly beside her. The forest felt different now, not just quiet but complicit. A living thing that had watched everything unfold and said nothing. Romero broke the silence as they neared the edge of town. That red X on the map, it's not random. It's marked just past the bend where the lake meets that unused trail near the spillway. Diane nodded slowly. They dredged the lake back in 2005, but the spillway was too deep to drain. I remember. They said it was too dangerous. Romero glanced at her. They also said they found nothing in the lake. They weren't looking in the right place, Diane murmured. Her mind raced with memories now edged in suspicion. Had someone been following Katie all summer? Was it someone she knew? A teacher, a neighbor, someone who'd blended in too easily to be noticed? Romero's phone buzzed. She answered quickly, her voice sharpening. Yes? You're sure? She paused. No. Don't touch anything. We're on our way. She hung up and looked at Diane. They found something else. A maintenance worker at the spillway station was clearing brush. He found a bundle wrapped in tarp, stuck in the metal grate below the overflow valve. Diane went still. What was in it? Romero's jaw tightened. Bones. Children's bones. For a second, everything around Diane blurred. The road, the trees, even the sound of the tires beneath them. Do they think it's Katie? She asked, almost afraid to say it out loud. Too early to tell, Romero said. Could be animal. Could be someone else. But it was wrapped. Intentionally placed. And it's the same location marked on the map we found. Diane turned to the window, staring out into the gray wash of trees. Her heartbeat thudded so loudly in her ears, she barely heard herself speak. Whoever this is, they never left Willow Creek. The forest had kept its secret for 6 long years. But now, piece by piece, it was unraveling. And something buried was fighting its way back to the surface. The spillway was cordoned off with yellow tape by the time they arrived, the air thick with humidity and the smell of moss and rusted metal. Uniformed officers stood in a loose perimeter around the drainage channel, while a coroner's van idled nearby, its engine low and steady like a heart monitor. The bundle had already been carefully removed and placed inside a sealed evidence container. Romero met briefly with the forensic team, while Diane stood at the edge of the water, staring down at the slow, dark current slipping beneath the concrete. It had always unsettled her, the way the spillway disappeared under the old bridge like a throat-swallowing rain. Now she saw it for what it was, a perfect hiding place. A secret that had rested just out of reach for over half a decade. When Romero returned, her face was calm but unreadable. Preliminary analysis says the bones are animal, she said. But wrapped the way they were, it wasn't an accident. Someone wanted us to think it was her. Diane didn't feel relief. She felt something worse, manipulation. They're playing with us, she whispered, leaving clues, watching how we respond. Romero nodded. And if that's true, the next move is coming soon. We need to figure out who had access to that area. Maintenance crews, fishermen, kids who used to hang out down here. Anyone who would know about that channel and how to reach it without being seen. As Romero stepped away to make calls, Diane knelt by the spillway's edge, her fingers brushing the damp concrete. She tried to picture Katie here, not her disappearance, but her presence. Did she pass by this place? Did she scream? Did someone hear her and do nothing? Or was she never brought here at all? A loud crunch behind her broke her thoughts. She turned quickly, just a squirrel darting across the brush. But something glinted behind the animal, half buried near the tree line. Diane rose and moved toward it slowly, her breath catching. It was a shard of broken mirror, small, triangular, reflecting the dull gray sky. Beside it, barely visible, were the remnants of something fabric-like. She knelt and tugged gently. A strip of faded cloth emerged, once pink, now dirt-stained and brittle. A ribbon. Katie's. Diane had tied it around her daughter's handlebars the week before she vanished. Romero, she called, voice low and sharp. I found something. The agent was beside her in seconds. She looked down at the ribbon and the glass and didn't speak for a long time. Then she straightened and said softly, "He's watching again." And somewhere in the woods behind them, something rustled, too heavy to be wind. Romero motioned for an officer to collect the ribbon and glass carefully. sealing both in separate evidence bags before they deteriorated any further. But Diane remained frozen, her eyes still locked on the spot where she'd found them. It wasn't just the objects, it was the timing. First the helmet, now this. Someone was leading them. Not with breadcrumbs, but with memories, weaponized and placed like emotional landmines. Romero knelt beside her again, voice low. This wasn't dropped by accident. This was placed here. Recently. Dirt around it's loose. No sign of age. Whoever left this, they knew we'd come. Diane finally stood, brushing her hands off against her jeans. You think he's still here? Romero looked toward the dense woods, her eyes sharp. I think he never left. He's been here the whole time, blending in, waiting. The weight of that hit hard. For years, Diane had imagined Katie being taken far away. To another city, another state, even another country. It was easier to imagine the horror as distant. But now she saw the uglier truth. It was close. It had always been close. That night, back at the house, Diane couldn't sleep. The ribbon sat on the table across from her, sealed in its bag, but it may as well have been an alarm clock ticking down to something inevitable. The past was circling in on her, tighter and tighter. She got up around 2 a.m., pacing the floor. Her eyes landed on a dusty shoebox at the back of her hallway closet. Old photos, school drawings, random childhood mementos. She hadn't opened it since the second year Katie was gone. Now, hands trembling, she did. Inside, tucked between birthday cards and construction paper valentines, was something that didn't belong. A photo she didn't remember putting there. Her, Tom, and Katie at the 4th of July fair. Diane stared at it. Her thumb brushed the edge. Then her blood ran cold. In the background, blurred but unmistakably there, was a man standing beside the bumper cars. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at Katie. Not with curiosity. With familiarity. Obsession. He was just part of the crowd, but something about his posture, the way his body leaned ever so slightly toward her, turned Diane's stomach. She flipped the photo over. Written in pencil, faint and smudged, she was mine first. Her breath caught. Her hands shook. She called Romero. Someone's been in my house, she said, and he's trying to remind me of something I never knew I forgot. Romero was at the house in less than 10 minutes, hair pulled back, face pale but composed. She entered through the back door without waiting for an invitation, a gloved hand already reaching for the photo Diane had found. Diane handed it over without a word, watching as the agent's eyes scanned every inch of the image, her expression tightening with each passing second. The date matches, Romero said quietly. The 4th of July, 2 weeks before Katie vanished. She looked at the handwriting again, lips pressed into a thin line. You're sure you've never seen this before? Positive, Diane said. I packed that box myself. I haven't touched it in years. I only opened it tonight because... Her voice trailed off. Because something had led her to it. Romero nodded like she already knew. She carefully slid the photo into a new evidence sleeve, then turned toward the living room, scanning the walls, the furniture, the space around them. He's not just watching, she said. He's testing, leaving objects in places that mean something, to Katie, to you. This is psychological. He's provoking emotional responses, trying to pull something out. Diane sat down slowly on the edge of the couch. Why? Because he's building to something. A pattern. He's escalating. This started with the helmet. Then the fake bones. Now he's in your house. He wants attention, or maybe he wants control again. The fact that he's still playing after all this time, that means Katie was never random. Diane's voice cracked. Then who was she to him? Romero didn't answer right away. She walked toward the window, pulling back the curtain just slightly. The street was empty, but the air had changed, heavy again, like the hours before a thunderstorm. We need to go public, Romero said finally. We release the photo. Ask for help identifying the man in the background. We say it's related to the case, but not everything. Just enough to flush him out. Diane hesitated. If we do that, and he sees it, won't he run? Romero turned, her eyes fierce now. No, he'll do the opposite. He'll get closer. Diane sat there, holding the plastic-sealed ribbon in her lap like it was a piece of her daughter's soul, and tried not to picture the man behind the bumper cars stepping out of the crowd and back into her life. But in her gut she knew. He'd already returned. She could feel it, like a shift in the air, like the closing of a trap. The photo went live the next morning. Local news picked it up within hours, and by noon, it was circulating online. A cropped version that showed only the blurred figure in the background, standing just behind the bumper cars, his face slightly turned but unmistakably focused on Katie. "Do you recognize this man?" the headlines asked. Authorities believe he may have information in the 2003 disappearance of Katie Breyer. The response was immediate. Dozens of calls flooded the sheriff's office. Most were useless. "He looks like my old math teacher. Could be my ex from Spokane. He's a dead ringer for my brother-in-law." But a few tips stood out, 3 to be exact, all pointing to the same name: Gordon Vellis, a former groundskeeper at Willow Creek Middle School. Hired in late 2002. Quiet, polite, always wore gloves, even in summer. He'd worked maintenance during summer break, often seen on the outer edges of school property. Katie would have passed him every day. He disappeared suddenly in August of 2003, a month after Katie vanished, with no forwarding address. His records showed a P.O. box in Redmond, but that had been closed for years. Romero ordered an immediate background check. No family, no criminal history, no bank account activity since 2004. It was like he had evaporated or learned how to disappear. "He's either dead," Romero said grimly, "or he's been living off the grid." Watching from a distance, Diane stared at the screen in front of her, the pixelated image of Vellis's employee badge blown up beside the fair photo. The resemblance was undeniable. Same jawline, same posture, same eerily blank expression. She didn't remember him. Not clearly. Maybe he was just a face in the hallway. But Katie might have noticed him. Maybe even spoken to him. Maybe he thought she noticed him. The thought made Diane's stomach lurch. Romero was already making calls, pulling satellite records, tracing traffic cams from that donation bin footage, trying to match the vehicle type. "If he's alive, we'll find him," she promised. But Diane had learned not to trust promises. Not anymore. She walked into Katie's room for the first time in weeks. Everything was exactly as it had been left, a still frame of 2003. But as she ran her hand across the dresser, something shifted slightly beneath her fingers. A creased photograph, poking out from under a book. She lifted it, hands going ice cold. It was another Polaroid, this one of the fairy circle, taken from high above, like from the trees. In the center of the frame was Diane herself, from 2 days ago, kneeling behind the bench, finding the box. The back of the photo had only 2 words scrawled in shaky handwriting: "Getting warmer." Diane nearly dropped the photo. Her breath caught in her throat, her pulse roaring in her ears. The photo wasn't old. It wasn't archival. It had been taken this week. Someone had been in the woods with them, hidden, silent, watching. Close enough to photograph her at the moment she uncovered the box, close enough to follow her home and plant the image in her daughter's room. The weight of it hit her like a punch. This wasn't a memory anymore. This was now. She stumbled out of the room, photo clutched in her shaking hand, and called Romero, who answered on the first ring. "He's here," Diane whispered, voice hoarse. "He was in the woods with us, watching us. He took a picture of me while I was finding the box, and he left it here, in Katie's room." Romero didn't hesitate. "Stay in the house. Lock all doors and windows. I'm on my way. Do not go outside. Do not answer the door for anyone but me." The line went dead. Diane locked everything. Windows, front door, back door, even the crawl space under the porch. Her hands were steady now, fear converted into something cold and focused. She placed the photo on the table next to the others, as if lining up the pieces of a puzzle that was finally showing its edges. Romero arrived 15 minutes later, gun holstered, her team sweeping the property before she stepped inside. She took one look at the new photo and didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, We've underestimated him. He's not just watching. He's orchestrating. This is choreography. Why now? Diane asked, barely able to keep her voice even. Why resurface now? Romero leaned forward, her eyes grim. Because he's losing control. He's desperate. He wants to own the ending. Diane's eyes flicked to Katie's bedroom. Then we changed the script. That night, Romero installed surveillance inside and outside the house. Motion-activated floodlights, hidden cameras in the trees. Diane barely slept, staring at the photo of herself, knowing somewhere not far away, someone else was staring back. At 3:14 a.m., the back camera caught a shape. Tall, still, standing at the tree line. Not moving, not approaching, just watching. The footage cut out after 27 seconds. When it returned, the shape was gone. But the message had been delivered. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was waiting. Morning brought no comfort. The sun rose behind a veil of fog, and the house felt smaller somehow, as if the walls themselves were bracing for something. Diane stood at the kitchen window, staring into the tree line where the shape had stood just hours earlier. She wondered if he was still there, hidden behind bark and shadow, smiling to himself. Romero reviewed the footage with a grim silence. The figure hadn't advanced, hadn't tested the locks. It hadn't needed to. Its message had been delivered not through threat, but through proximity. I'm close. They could no longer pretend they were hunting him. He was leading them. He wants us to find something, Romero said, staring at the screen. He could have broken in. He could have taken more. But he didn't. He left something again. He always does. She stepped outside, scanning the yard, the porch, every bush and flower bed. Nothing. Then she circled around to the far side of the garage, where the ivy grew thickest, curling up the siding like fingers. There, half, hidden in the roots, was a plastic envelope. Water-sealed. Thin. Romero crouched down, her breath shallow, and picked it up with gloved hands. Inside was a folded piece of paper. A map again, but this one was hand-drawn, more detailed than before. A crude sketch of the woods, the trail, the fairy circle, and one more thing. An X, drawn near a dead-end ravine, known to kids as Whistler's Hollow. Below the X, a single line of writing, Last Ride. Romero showed it to Diane. Her voice was quiet, but certain. He's ready for us now. Diane didn't flinch. Then let's go. Romero hesitated. This could be a trap. So was the last 6 years, Diane said. I'm done hiding. By noon, they had a team. 2 deputies. A canine unit. Romero and Diane. They followed the new map into the forest, the familiar paths warping now under the weight of new knowledge. Every branch seemed to whisper. Every breeze carried breath. It took them over an hour to reach Whistler's Hollow, a steep drop of eroded stone and twisted roots. Once the site of an old logging camp, long since abandoned and overrun by moss and silence. And there, just beyond the crest, half buried beneath rocks and leaves, was something unmistakable, a tire. Faded blue rubber. Bent spokes. A rusted handlebar. It was Katie's Schwinn, her bike. After 6 years, it had returned from the dark. But it was what lay just beside it that made Diane drop to her knees. A shoe. Small. Torn. Pink with a cartoon sun, still barely clinging to the side. Katie's. Diane's hand reached out, then froze. Because just beyond that, buried in the soil, was something else. Something human. A small, pale hand. Fragile. Motionless. Just barely reaching toward the surface, as if even now, it was still trying to come home. Time fractured around Diane as she stared at the hand. A fragile thing dusted with soil and time, curled slightly as if in mid-reach. A sound rose in her ears like a roar, not from outside, but inside her: grief, rage, fear, hope, all crashing together in a tidal wave that nearly buckled her to the ground. Romero stepped in quickly, motioning to the deputies. We need the coroner. No one touches anything. Diane didn't argue. She just backed away slowly, arms wrapped around herself as though to hold her pieces together. But in her eyes, something had changed. Not despair, not even heartbreak. Certainty. Katie had been here. This wasn't theory anymore. This was truth. The recovery team arrived within an hour. The bike was gently lifted from the dirt, its paint worn to ghost blue, the front tire still bent inward from the pressure of years. Then the excavation began, delicate, precise, reverent. First the shoe, then the hand, then a shoulder, a fragment of cloth, a shirt with faded stripes, the kind Katie always wore. But as more was unearthed, something became disturbingly clear. It wasn't a full skeleton. It wasn't even half. What they uncovered was partial, an arm, a piece of rib, a jawbone. Enough to match dental records. Enough for DNA. But not a whole body. Diane felt the horror bloom inside her, dark and twisting. "Where's the rest of her?" she whispered. Romero's face was unreadable. "We don't know that it's her yet." But they both knew. The items, the map, the location, none of it was coincidence. And yet something about it felt wrong. Too curated, too staged, like a performance meant to satisfy them just enough to stop asking questions. As the coroner's team carefully sealed the remains for testing, Diane turned to Romero, her voice flat. "This isn't the end." Romero nodded slowly. "No, it's a message. And if I had to guess, it's not saying goodbye. It's saying you're getting too close." The forest was quiet again as they left, the kind of quiet that didn't feel like peace. It felt like retreat, like something was watching them go, smiling in the silence. And as Diane turned for one last look at the clearing, she swore she saw it, a figure between the trees. Not moving, not running, just waiting. The forensic report arrived 3 days later, and the confirmation hit with a paradoxical numbness. Part of the remains belonged to Katie Breyer. The DNA matched. There was no doubt. But even with that definitive truth, the room didn't feel any different. The air was still heavy. The ache in Diane's chest didn't lessen. Closure, it turned out, wasn't a door. It was just another hallway. What made it worse was what wasn't in the report. There were no signs of trauma on the bones they recovered. No fractures, no defensive wounds, no evidence of restraint. Just time and earth. The coroner estimated the body had been buried sometime between late 2003 and early 2004. But that didn't explain the messages. The photos. The ribbon that hadn't aged a day. Or the surveillance photo of Diane from just a week ago, finding the box in the woods. Someone wanted them to believe Katie had died 6 years ago, but someone else was telling them she hadn't. At least not entirely. Romero stood in front of a whiteboard, now cluttered with maps, pins, and photos. "We're being fed 2 stories," she said, pacing. "One ends with Katie's death and a buried bike. The other insists she was alive longer, maybe even being moved." Diane sat nearby, arms crossed, staring at the floor. "Which one do you believe?" Romero stopped. "I believe we're only being shown what he wants us to see. And I believe the real truth is still out there, buried deeper, behind all this noise." She paused, then added, "And I believe he's preparing for the final act." That night, Diane couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her daughter's bed, surrounded by the last scent of her, the old posters on the walls, the notebooks on the shelf still filled with half-written stories and doodles in the margins. At 2:46 a.m., her phone buzzed. One new message. Unknown number. No text. Just a video file. She opened it, heart pounding. The screen filled with shaky, grainy footage, clearly taken on an old camcorder. It showed a girl, Katie. Younger. Alive. Her hair in a braid, her blue helmet perched lopsided on her head. She was sitting in the fairy circle, smiling, humming. A soft, muffled voice from behind the camera said, "You always look happiest here." Katie didn't respond. She just looked into the camera, directly at it, and then directly through it. Her smile faded, her lips parted, and in a voice no older than 15, she said, "Mom, he said you'd come looking." The screen went black. Diane stared at the phone screen, unmoving. Her breath caught mid-chest, as if her body had forgotten how to let it go. Her fingers trembled, hovering just above the screen like touching it again might somehow break the spell. Katie's voice, real alive, still echoed in her ears, and not like a memory. It wasn't something she'd heard before. It was new, recent. She replayed the clip 3 more times, analyzing every detail. The background, the angle, the lighting, the slight shake of the camcorder. Nothing about it felt archival. Katie had looked older than the last known photo. The braid wasn't one Diane remembered. And her voice, God, her voice, had a tone Diane hadn't heard since middle school, the edge of curiosity still present, but dulled, tired. Resigned, like a candle halfway gone. Romero arrived 15 minutes later. She didn't ask if it was real. She didn't question Diane's fear. She simply plugged the phone into her laptop and began scrubbing through the footage frame by frame. "There's no metadata," she muttered. "It was stripped before it was sent. Whoever made this knows what they're doing." Diane sat silently at the kitchen table, arms folded, rocking slightly. "That place she's sitting, it's the fairy circle. I'd know those trees anywhere." Romero zoomed in, eyes narrowing. "Look here, behind her, about 20 feet. See that? Looks like a faded metal sign. We didn't see that last time we were there." Diane leaned in. It was barely visible, a rusted post half swallowed by bark and vines. "What is it?" "Don't know," Romero replied. "But if she's alive in this video, if this isn't old footage, that spot may be something more than just a childhood hiding place." They went back out before dawn, accompanied by 2 deputies this time. Flashlights swept over tangled brush and soft earth as they pushed back into the woods, retracing their steps to the clearing. Morning birds had just begun their quiet chorus when they reached the fairy circle again. The bench was still there, collapsed further into the ground. But now, knowing what to look for, they saw it, the sign. Faded and rusted, hidden behind a wall of ivy. Romero cut the growth away, slowly revealing a metal panel with embossed lettering. It was a trail marker. Willow Creek Civic Bunker, installed 1955. Authorized access only, maintenance panel behind. Diane stepped back, eyes wide. A bunker. Romero's flashlight caught the edge of a half-buried hatch door just a few feet away, covered in moss, camouflaged by time. She turned to Diane. She wasn't sitting here because it was sentimental. She was waiting for us to see what was behind her. Romero dropped to her knees and began clearing away dirt and leaves. With the help of a crowbar from the deputy's pack, the hatch groaned open, exhaling a rush of stale, metallic air. Beneath was a ladder, steel, rusted, descending into darkness. Romero glanced up, face pale. "If she's down there, we may be the first people to see this place in decades." Diane didn't hesitate. She placed one hand on the edge of the hatch and began to climb. "Then let's find her." The metal rungs were slick with condensation, each one groaning softly under Diane's weight as she climbed deeper into the earth. The air grew colder with every step, thick with rust and mildew, and something else, an old, clinical scent that reminded her faintly of hospital hallways and basement boiler rooms. Above her, Romero followed, flashlight beams sweeping the walls. Below, the blackness opened into a room that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Diane stepped off the final rung and landed on solid concrete. The room was circular, maybe 20 feet across, with a low ceiling and a single, heavy door on the far end. A metal desk stood to one side, rusted through at the corners. A decayed bunk cot sat empty in the opposite corner, its mattress sagging like a collapsed lung. Pipes ran along the ceiling, some leaking, dripping quietly into puddles on the floor. But what pulled Diane's focus was the chalkboard on the far wall, still intact, still scrawled with writing. Most of it was gibberish, equations, names, tally marks. But in the center, written in all capital letters, were the words, "She's still here." Romero stepped beside her, shining her light across the message. Whoever was down here, they wanted someone to know. Either they were keeping her here, or she was keeping herself. Diane interrupted, eyes sharp. "Hiding." Romero crossed the room, examining the heavy door. It had no lock on the outside, only a sliding bolt on the inside. "This door was made to keep someone out, not in," Romero murmured. "She might have used this place to escape him, to survive." Diane's hand brushed the wall beside the door. Her fingers found something. Scratches. Small ones. Short and deliberate, like someone had been marking time. There were over 100 of them, lined up in neat rows. Days. Maybe months. Romero pulled the bolt and slowly pushed open the door. The next room was darker, narrower. Another cot. A shelf of canned food. An old tape recorder. And in the corner, taped to the concrete wall, dozens of pages torn from a child's notebook. Some had drawings, trees, a bike, a girl and her mother holding hands under the sun. Others had words. He comes at night. I pretend I'm not here. MOM, if you find this, don't cry. I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. Diane's legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the cold floor, tears hot and silent. Romero stood still for a long moment, then crouched beside her, her voice shaking for the first time. She was alive. She survived this. At least for a while. Diane reached out and touched one of the pages, carefully, gently, like it might disappear. Katie was here, she whispered. My baby was here. She was waiting for me. And somewhere above them, back in the forest where the trees stood watch and the world kept turning, a branch cracked. Someone was still out there. And now, he knew they were inside. The sound echoed down the shaft, faint, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Diane froze, her hand still resting on the wall, her breath caught mid-inhale. Romero slowly reached for her radio, lowering her voice to a whisper. Unit 6, this is Romero. We have movement topside. Request immediate eyes on perimeter. The radio crackled back a beat later. Copy. Nothing visual yet, but we're sweeping. Stay alert. Down in the bunker, the quiet returned like a vacuum. Every drip of water, every breath, every shift of weight felt amplified. Diane stood slowly, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket. Her voice had steadied again, shaped by a kind of clarity only pain could carve. He knew we'd come here, she said. He left those drawings like breadcrumbs. Not just for me, for himself. Romero turned toward the shelf with the cans and the recorder. She clicked the recorder's button, old, dusty analog. For a second, nothing. Then a click. Static. And finally, Katie's voice. Weak, soft, but unmistakably hers. If you find this, it means he's back. Or maybe he never left. I don't know what's real anymore. I just know that I stayed here because it was the only place he wasn't. And if I leave, he'll find me again. A pause. Breathing. Mom, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry. I tried to stay brave. I pretended it was a story, a game. But I'm so tired. I think he's watching again. I hear his boots in the leaves. He hums now. He didn't used to hum. If I disappear again, don't stop looking. Please, don't let him erase me. The tape clicked off. Diane covered her mouth with both hands. Her knees nearly buckled again, but Romero caught her. She was alive long after they gave up, Diane choked out. They stopped looking. But she didn't stop surviving. Romero nodded, her own voice tight. And she left this for a reason. She wanted to be found. She wanted him to be found. A sudden shout from above crackled through the radio. Movement confirmed. He's circling the clearing. We've got a visual male, 6 foot, light jacket, ball cap, moving west through the brush. Romero was already up the ladder before the transmission ended, her voice sharp. Don't engage. I want him alive. I want him talking. Diane followed seconds later, adrenaline overpowering the ache in her legs. When they emerged into daylight, it was already fading, late afternoon sky burning into orange. The deputies pointed westward, down a narrow slope, toward the treeline. He went that way, one of them shouted. Diane turned without hesitation and ran, her feet pounding the forest floor, heart racing not from fear anymore, but from rage. The man who haunted her family's life, who watched her child, who led them here like rats in a maze, he was running. But this time she was chasing. Branches slapped against Diane's arms and legs as she tore through the underbrush, lungs heaving, heart a war drum in her chest. She could hear the others behind her, Romero shouting commands into her radio, deputies scrambling to flank, but none of it registered. The only thing that existed in Diane's world now was the figure ahead, just barely visible through gaps in the trees. Tall, fast, moving with the ease of someone who knew the woods. He ducked low beneath a fallen log, disappeared behind a cluster of firs, but Diane didn't slow. Her body ran on something primal, deeper than exhaustion, deeper even than fear. This wasn't just pursuit. This was reckoning. The man ahead stumbled once, his boot catching on a root. He righted himself quickly, but it gave her just enough time to close the distance. Another 10 yards. Then 5. Diane lunged, hands outstretched, teeth clenched, and caught the edge of his jacket. He twisted hard, breaking free, but not before he turned just enough for her to see his face. It was him, the man from the photo, the man behind the bumper cars, the one who had watched her daughter with eyes that had memorized her. Their eyes locked for one suspended heartbeat. And then he ran again. Romero caught up seconds later, panting hard. "Diane," she shouted. "You okay?" Diane nodded, breathless, pointing. "It's him. That's Gordon Velis." Romero's face sharpened with recognition and fury. She shouted into her radio. "Suspect ID confirmed. Gordon Velis. Suspect is on foot. Heading west-northwest. Deploy intercept team at Ridge Trail Split. Now." They pursued for another 100 yards before the ground began to slope downward, the trees thinning, the air growing colder. Diane recognized the change instantly. They were nearing the river. And just as she feared, Velis used it. He disappeared down a rock ledge and plunged into the narrow creek below, vanishing beneath the surface like he belonged to it. Romero reached the edge and aimed her flashlight into the current, eyes scanning. "Damn it," she muttered. "There's an old culvert downstream. If he knows it, he's gone." Diane stared at the swirling water, her hands clenched into fists. "He knew we were coming. He let us get close." Romero turned toward her, but not close enough to stop him. And in that moment, Diane understood the horrible game they were caught in. Velis wasn't afraid of being found. He had planned for it. Every breadcrumb, every photo, every message, it was all part of the show. The only question now was, what was left of Katie's story that he hadn't told them yet? Because it wasn't over. Not even close. They returned to the station soaked, bruised, and burning with frustration. Velis had vanished like vapor, slipping through the creek and into one of the many old culverts that laced the land like forgotten veins. The manhunt widened, roadblocks thrown up across every possible exit from Willow Creek, but Diane already knew. He wasn't leaving. He didn't run to escape. He ran to control the narrative, to maintain the space between being seen and being caught. That was his power. And now, he was using it for his final move. Romero dried off in the evidence room, poring over the recovered photos and drawings again, but this time with a new intensity. "Everything he's shown us, every single item, wasn't just a memory," she said. "They were markers, coordinates. And we've been looking at them emotionally, not tactically." She spread them out across the table. The photo from the fair, the drawing of the fairy circle, the marked map, the video of Katie sitting in front of the bunker. Romero circled each with a red marker, connecting the points. A rough shape emerged, crooked and irregular, but Diane recognized the pattern immediately. "That's the south quadrant of Willow Creek," she whispered. "It ends right where the old orchard used to be." Romero tapped the edge of the line. "There's a property there. County records say it's been abandoned since '91. No ownership transfers. No renovations. No utility activity in decades." Diane didn't hesitate. "That's where he is." They drove out before dawn, accompanied by a full team this time. 2 cruisers, tactical gear, thermal drones. The orchard had long since been reclaimed by nature. Trees bent inward, limbs curled like arthritic hands, ground riddled with holes and stumps. But at the center of the property, half buried in ivy and thyme, sat a rotting house. No electricity. No mailbox. Windows boarded from the inside. Romero gave the nod. "Sweep it." The team moved in fast, weapons raised, calls echoing down the hallway as they cleared room after room. Mold-stained wallpaper peeled like old skin. A broken crib sat in the front room. Mismatched shoes were lined neatly along the wall, small ones, child-sized. Then someone shouted from the basement, "Clear, but there's something down here." Diane's feet moved before her mind caught up. She descended the stairs 2 at a time, heart thundering, and there, amid the filth and rotting beams, was a wall covered in paper. Pages, photos, maps, sketches, newspaper clippings. But not of Katie, of Diane. Her childhood photos, high school graduation, her wedding day, Katie as a baby in her arms. All of it. It hadn't started with Katie. It had started with her. Romero's voice was hollow. He didn't want your daughter. He wanted you. Katie was just how he kept you watching. Diane's knees gave way as she realized the full horror. All this time, she'd been chasing her daughter's shadow, thinking she was the story. But she wasn't. She was the audience. And now the final curtain was rising. Romero crouched beside the basement wall, her eyes sweeping over the timeline Velis had constructed like an altar. Every clipping, every photograph, every drawing ordered with unsettling precision. Diane's life had been documented in full. The hospital birth certificate, a newspaper birth announcement, an elementary school class photo she hadn't seen in 30 years. Even the receipt for the helmet Katie wore the day she vanished, dated and circled in red ink. This wasn't obsession. It was authorship. Velis hadn't just been watching. He had been writing their lives like a script. Romero stood slowly, her voice low and tight. This was never about kidnapping. It was about narrative. He's been directing every chapter. When you hurt, when you hope, when you move. He wants you to feel like you've uncovered the truth, just in time for the ending. And that means this isn't over. Diane stepped backward, away from the wall, her skin crawling as the implications sank in. Her grief hadn't just been grief, it had been curated. The helmet left in the bin, the ribbon near the spillway, the photo hidden in her own home. All planted, each time to strike just when her resolve was fraying. And all of it calculated to bring her here, to this house, this room, this moment. She turned, suddenly breathless. He's watching us right now. Romero's gaze snapped up. We need to move. He wouldn't leave this unless he was done with it. Unless he set the stage for the next act. The basement team cleared the rest of the house. Nothing. No fresh food. No running water. Just dust, rot, and obsession. But tucked beneath a floorboard in the upstairs bedroom, they found a key. Taped to it was a note, the handwriting unmistakable. One last memory. One last place. The key was old, brass, etched with the number 9. Romero and Diane stared at it for a long moment. Then Diane said quietly, Katie used to keep a lockbox. Under her bed. Number 9 was her favorite. She called it her lucky number. Romero nodded. Then that's where we go next. They returned to the Breyer house in silence. The box was still there, tucked beneath Katie's bed, covered in dust but exactly as she had left it 6 years ago. Diane turned the key. The lock clicked open. Inside was a stack of letters, Katie's handwriting messy, rounded, familiar, and a single cassette tape marked in red ink. If something happens. Diane's hands shook as she placed it into an old player. She pressed play. Katie's voice came through, quiet and trembling. Mom, I don't know if this will reach you. I don't know if I'm still me when you hear this. But he said if I was good, if I stayed quiet, he'd let me leave one piece of me behind. So this is it. This is mine. His name is Gordon. But that's not who he really is. He changes names. Faces. He moves like wind. Like a story. And he says you were the only one who ever made him feel real. Diane's eyes widened. The tape continued. He talks about you more than me. He has your pictures in his journal. He said we were just his way back to you. That you'd understand him once you remembered everything. Romero looked over slowly. Remembered what? Diane stood perfectly still. Her eyes slowly dropped to the last letter in the box, the envelope marked for Mom, when it's time. She opened it. Inside were 5 words, written in her daughter's fragile, terrified handwriting. You knew him before I did. And just like that, the final puzzle piece snapped into place. Katie hadn't been chosen randomly. She had been chosen because of Diane. Because long before Gordon Velis was a ghost in the trees, he had been someone else. Someone Diane had once known, and long ago tried to forget. The air around her seemed to collapse inward as Diane stared at those 5 words, her hands trembling, her mind recoiling from their weight. "You knew him before I did." The sentence echoed through her like a siren underwater. Romero moved toward her carefully, gently, like someone approaching a survivor pulled from wreckage. "Diane," she said, soft but firm. "What does that mean?" Diane shook her head at first, her mouth open, but no words came. Only fragments. Flashes. A dorm hallway. A name she hadn't spoken in decades. A boy with too much silence and not enough kindness behind his eyes. Not Velis, not yet. Back then he was Michael. A freshman with bad posture and a quiet obsession with true crime books and broken things. They shared a creative writing class at Spencer College. They'd spoken a few times. He'd written a short story about a girl who disappeared on her bike, and it had unsettled her enough that she stopped talking to him. But he hadn't stopped talking to her. He started leaving her letters. Notes. Journal entries slipped under her door. Nothing threatening at first, just attention. But when she didn't respond, the tone shifted. More desperate. More possessive. She filed a complaint with campus security. Nothing ever came of it. He dropped out that spring. She never saw him again. She never told anyone, not even Tom. Until now, she hadn't remembered his last name. But it wasn't Velis. It was Gordon Michael Veldin. Romero was already on her laptop, typing furiously. That name. It's an alias trail. Look. She flipped the screen to Diane. Veldin becomes Velis. Legal name change in 1998 in Washington state. But before that, he had sealed records. He disappeared off-grid for 5 years after leaving Spencer. Diane sank slowly into the couch, her hands covering her mouth. He didn't just want Katie. He wanted a second chance. At the story. At me. Romero nodded, eyes wide. You were the first. Katie was the sequel. Silence filled the room, thick and smothering. Then Diane stood, her voice brittle but clear. He's circling something. Everything he's done, it's about finality. Ending it on his terms. But he made one mistake. Romero raised an eyebrow. What's that? He left Katie alive long enough to leave me a way in. She walked back to the box, flipped through the letters again, faster now, scanning for details. One envelope was sealed with tape, different from the rest. On the back was a sketch, an odd little symbol Katie used to doodle in the corners of her notebooks, a crooked tree with an X carved into it. Diane stared. She drew this over and over when she was 9. I thought it was just a habit. But it's not a symbol. It's a location. There's a tree like this just north of our property. Katie called it the Wish Tree. Romero's radio crackled to life. Ma'am, we've got motion on trail camera 7, edge of Briar property. One figure. Stationary. Romero and Diane locked eyes. He was back. Waiting. And this time, Diane would be the one who finished his story. The sun was just beginning to set when they reached the northern edge of the property, casting long golden shadows across the underbrush. The air was heavy with a silence that didn't feel natural, not peaceful but expectant. The kind of quiet that falls right before something breaks. Diane led the way, flashlight gripped tightly in one hand, the other clutching the letter with the tree sketch. Romero and 2 deputies followed behind, weapons ready but lowered, careful not to shift the atmosphere into chaos. They all felt it. The final page was turning. The Wish Tree stood at the center of a clearing, taller than Diane remembered, its bark scarred and split like veins carved by time. At its base, just as Katie had drawn, was an old X cut deep into the trunk. And beside it, sitting cross-legged as if waiting for a picnic that would never come, was Gordon Velis. He didn't move when they approached. He didn't run, didn't flinch. He just looked up with tired eyes and an almost childlike calm. You finally remembered, he said softly, like they were old friends catching up after years apart. Romero raised her gun. Hands where I can see them. Now. He complied slowly, but his eyes never left Diane. "I always knew you'd come back here. You never could leave things unfinished." Diane stepped forward, breath shaky, rage and horror braided tightly in her chest. "Why, Katie?" she asked. "Why my daughter?" He smiled, small, distant. "Because you stopped seeing me. But I never stopped seeing you. I wanted to show you what it feels like to be forgotten." Romero moved in, keeping her voice low. "Where is she?" she asked. "All of her. Not just bones. The truth, Gordon. No riddles." For the first time, something in his expression faltered. He looked down at his hands. "I didn't kill her," he whispered. "I couldn't. She reminded me too much of you. She was smart, clever. She figured out how to escape the bunker. Hid in the woods for days before I caught up. But then she vanished. Like you did all those years ago. Just gone." Diane stepped forward, voice like a blade. "But you left pieces of her. You wanted me to find them." He nodded, almost proud. "To keep the story alive. If there's no ending, people keep reading. You were my favorite character." Romero's voice cut sharp through the air. "Where did she go?" Gordon looked up at the tree, blinking slowly. "I always thought she'd come back here. Like you did. To the roots. To where you used to hide when you were a girl." He paused. "Maybe she did." Romero nodded to the deputies. They moved in fast, cuffing him while she turned to Diane, her voice taut. "We need a ground scan. Soil disturbance, hollow roots, anything." Diane walked slowly to the tree, pressing her hand against the X carved into the bark. Something shifted under her palm, a soft give in the earth below. She dropped to her knees and began clearing away the leaves and moss. There, beneath a layer of roots and earth, was a small, hand-dug chamber. And inside it, dry and wrapped in a makeshift cloth, was a notebook. Katie's. Diane opened it with trembling hands. The first page read, "Mom, if you're reading this, I made it farther than he thought, and I'm still trying to come home." Katie's story hadn't ended in the woods. It had begun beneath them. Diane's fingers trembled as she turned the pages, each one written in Katie's familiar, looping script, uneven, hurried in places, but unmistakably hers. The ink had faded in parts, water-stained at the corners, but the words remained intact, each line a pulse of hope buried in the dirt. "I don't know how long I was underground. Days, maybe weeks. I stopped counting after the 5th time he came back. The door lock rusted. I escaped when the storm came. Water poured in and loosened the hinges. I ran. I didn't stop. I found the hollow tree. I made a place inside. Safe enough for a while. I knew if I went too far, I'd get lost again." He always watched the roads, but he never came to the tree. "I think it scared him. Or maybe it reminded him of you." Diane's throat closed, tears blurring the page. Romero crouched beside her, reading over her shoulder, her voice hushed. She survived. She outsmarted him. "I wanted to come home. I wanted to run. But I saw him watching the house. I didn't want him to follow me back to you. So I waited. And when I couldn't wait anymore, I started leaving clues. The ribbon, the drawing, the bike. I hoped you'd see them and remember what I remembered. The story started with you, so I made it end with you too. If you're reading this, it means you found the tree. And if you found the tree, then you finally remembered who he was. That's all I wanted, for you to know. Not just what happened to me, but why." The pages went on about the bunker, the things she heard at night, the names he whispered in his sleep. Diane read each one like scripture, absorbing her daughter's voice, her pain, her defiance. Then, in the very last page, was a map, sketched hastily, but clearly. A route, a destination, coordinates. "There's one last thing I couldn't do. But you can. It's where he took the others. The ones before me. I found their names scratched into the wall. He tried to bury them too. But I wouldn't let him." Romero's voice dropped. "This goes beyond Katie." Diane looked up, her eyes steel. "He's done writing this story." They brought Gordon back to the station under maximum security. He didn't resist. He barely spoke. But Diane didn't need his words anymore. She had Katie's, and Katie had given them the final chapter. The coordinates led to a ravine outside the county line, once a dumping site for the mill, now overgrown and forgotten. What they found there confirmed everything Katie had written. 7 shallow graves, all marked with small personal items. A necklace, a shoe, a tattered scrap of a school ID. Romero knelt by the final one, her hands clenched. They were all just stories to him, she whispered. Diane stood at the edge of the pit, the last page of her daughter's notebook pressed tightly in her palm. Not anymore. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting the orchard in long, golden shadows, Diane finally exhaled the breath she'd been holding for 6 years. Katie hadn't vanished. She had survived. She had fought. And in the end, it wasn't the police who solved the mystery. It was her. A week passed before Diane returned to the tree. This time, she came alone. No deputies. No radios. Just her and the air, still scented with cedar and damp moss, and the memory of a voice that had guided her through the dark. She sat at the base of the trunk, next to the X her daughter once carved with trembling fingers. The hollow was empty now. The notebook sealed in evidence. The graves exhumed. Gordon Velas charged with 7 counts of murder, unlawful imprisonment, and attempted homicide. But the courts could never sentence him in the way Diane already had. She had seen what he tried to erase. And more importantly, she had heard Katie. Not just her fear. Her strength. Her fire. Her love. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a new ribbon, pink, fresh, untorn, and tied it gently around the base of the old tree. A new marker, not of loss, but of endurance. Romero called that afternoon. The lab results confirmed it. Katie's remains were incomplete because she wasn't buried there. The parts Gordon left behind were intentional, to control the narrative. But Katie had outwitted him one final time. A new lead had opened, a small town in Montana. A teenage girl had shown up at a shelter there 6 months earlier, with no ID, no history, and eyes that didn't match her age. She gave a fake name, but in the police sketch, Diane recognized the shape of her daughter's smile. 3 days later, Diane stood on the threshold of the Montana shelter, her palms damp, heart drumming harder than it had when she first faced the man who tried to take everything. This was different. This wasn't about rage or revenge. This was about the possibility that sometimes a story doesn't end, it changes form. A young woman sat at the far end of the common room, her back turned, hair longer now, a different color. She was reading, slowly, carefully. Her posture was familiar. Diane took a step forward, then stopped, afraid the spell would break if she spoke. And then the girl turned. Time folded in on itself. Because it wasn't just the eyes, it was the jawline, the slight tilt of the head, the instinctive way she blinked twice when surprised. The same blink Diane had watched since Katie was 3 years old and first saw snow. Katie stood slowly. She didn't smile. Not yet. But her eyes welled with tears before either of them spoke a word. Diane's voice cracked through the stillness, softer than a whisper. "Baby, you made it." Katie's voice trembled back. "I didn't think I ever would." They didn't collapse into each other like in the movies. There was no orchestral swell. Just the slow, quiet crossing of space and the weight of arms wrapping around each other. Awkward, trembling, real. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Katie was no longer just the girl who vanished riding her bike in 2003. She was the girl who fought back, who survived a story designed to erase her. And Diane, the mother who refused to stop turning pages, had rewritten the ending. Together, at last.